Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast. Today, we're going to talk about mindful sex, and we have a special guest, Dr. Kelly Casperson, on. Just a quick reminder that nothing in this podcast is medical advice. Our intention today is, number one, to have fun. Number two, to talk candidly about sex, and specifically how mindfulness coaching and yoga can positively influence your experience of sex. We hope you will discover that mindfulness can make sex way better, that mindfulness is a tool that can quiet that crazy mind chatter, get you out of your head and into your body, and that the thought work, or otherwise known as coaching, can also help you enjoy sex a lot more and perhaps let go of some of those old struggles that feel like impossible to get rid of. The takeaways of today's episode are choosing an intention for sex can be helpful, and giving yourself a specific intention about how you want to show up can really change your experience. So I thought I would start just with a little story about how we met, because I always like to connect people of who I am and who you are. And we met many times online, but we first met in person in Austin at the Life Coach School Mastermind. And I knew all about your sex journey and your jobs and your upcoming book and all of those things, but I did not know that you were a yoga teacher or a mindfulness person. And so that was the connection that made me think, oh, we need to get together and have this conversation. And I think many of our listeners know that there was an episode a while ago that I actually did on mindful sex and mindful intimacy. And this episode, I am imagining, is going to be totally different take, and realizing that you can throw in all of these tools in different ways. And there's going to be so much good, juicy stuff in here. And I do hope that we spend a little bit of time talking about yoga and sex too, with the idea that, I don't think about it in that way, but it really has a lot of benefits and could really help you get back into your body and get stronger and change your experience of sex from an actual physical standpoint as well. So Kelly, would you introduce yourself, tell our listeners whatever you want to tell them about yourself and where you're at and why you're here, and then we'll get right into it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Kelly Casperson. I'm a board certified urologist. I practice in Washington State. And I always say I got into coaching because of sex, which is not everybody's story about how they got into coaching and mind work. But to go back to like the origin of this, because in hindsight, it all makes sense, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. But I was a neuroscience undergrad, loved the brain, didn't want to be a neurologist because you could tell people what was wrong with them, but not fix them. And I was very like, kidney stone, gone. Bladder tumor, gone. Can't pee, peeing. Like that's the life of a urologist, and that instant gratification was awesome. So I became a urologist, love it. In third year in residency, I was burnt out. Q2 call, bringing wine into the bathroom with the shower, and I knew that wasn't normal. And I was like, if I could just control people and control my day better, then my life will be better. So I started to figure out how to do that, which led me directly to Jon Kabat-Zinn and Buddhist philosophy, which tells you the exact opposite of what I was searching for, that you can't control anybody. The only person you can control is yourself. And so looking at where I am now, it started a long time ago in my own kind of burnout. We didn't call it that. We would never admit to burnout back then. But in my journey for better life, I found mindfulness and the role of our thoughts. So fast forward all these years, I had a patient in my clinic crying because she didn't want to have sex with her husband. Great marriage, wonderful relationship, no sex life. She literally changed my life. I was happy in urology, kind of a little bit bored. You get kind of good at your job after the 7-year itch, right? And so it was this perfect combination of like having the space and the curiosity because life was becoming routine. And I could have just kept doing what I was doing, right? And started doing all the research on female sexuality, education, the miseducation. Hormones. How does menopause play into it? How do you communicate with your partner about sex? How is the clitoris? How have we talked about the clitoris and completely ignored it in med school? Like all this female sexual stuff. And then you realize the biggest sex organ's the brain, right? And people come to me and they're like, I need to put the penis in the vagina. Like that's what they come to me as a doctor for. I need to put the penis in the vagina. And I'm like, well, do you want to put the penis in the vagina? No, no, I just do it because my husband partner wants it. Oh, okay. Well, if you think that about sex, it'll never be for you. It'll never be pleasurable, right? So looking at the thoughts that like, I can get the penis to go in the vagina. But if you think that's what sex is, like we've got so much more work to do. And I started a podcast now 2.5 years ago, and subsequently the book, because I live in the traditional medical model of the 15-minute follow-up visit. And I hate repeating myself just as a personality flaw that I have. But like, I can't undo 40 years of society's expectations, body image, relationship inequality, all that stuff that weighs on you when you come in, not knowing that most women don't have an orgasm when they put a penis in the vagina. You're actually not broken. You're actually very physiologically normal. You're just, it's like playing with the scrotum and expecting a man to get off. It's like you're playing with the vagina and expecting you to have an orgasm. Like it's in the neighborhood, but you're missing the mark. But we don't get that adult sex education. We get a disease and pregnancy prevention plan right around 3rd to 8th grade. But we never learn like spontaneous desire goes away when you're not getting dopamine from a new relationship anymore. And that's really defined as 6 to 12 months in, right? And here we are 15 years into our relationships or whatever, thinking we're broken, not understanding how dopamine in the brain and novelty works. So I went into coaching because I'm like, oh, desire is not a thing to be purchased from an influencer on Instagram. It's not a thing you put in your pocket and then you carry around your desire. It's not a purse, right? And where does desire come from? It comes from our thoughts, right? So as you know, desire can be a thought, it can be a feeling, it can be an action, it can be a result, it can be a circumstance, something you wish you had. So desire is very fun to play with, because I would argue, and I argue in my book, you don't even need desire. It's not even an ingredient. Most desire comes during sex or after sex. Wasn't that good? I forgot how good that was. We should remember to do that more because I forgot how good that was. Desire came after, right? And all these people have really crappy sex lives because they think desire is supposed to come before. So that's my long story of how I got here.
I love it. Well, and I love this idea that the biggest sex organ is the brain, because the brain is pretty much what we talk about here. And whether it's being mindful or whether it's, I think of coaching as intentional mindfulness, choosing your thoughts and choosing how you're going to show up for things. And I'm thinking, so how specifically can we use coaching and thought work and mindfulness to literally make sex better? And I mean better in kind of a better for you, because everybody's version of good sex is going to be different, but something that I'm thinking back to the name of your book, that we don't think is broken. I work with so many people that we find problems everywhere and we're looking for problems to solve and problems to fix. And so how can we use our brains to not have a problem?
Yeah. Well, I like to start by figuring out where you're at. Right? Because we don't even know what we want, let alone where we're at. If you ask the average woman, what do you want sexually? She struggles to actually tell you. And I think that's part of society being like, put everybody else first, right? Mm-hmm. And then also like she's been told what's, quote unquote heterosexual sex is by Hollywood and her first boyfriend and whatever else. And she doesn't match that. Of course she doesn't, because it's all a lie or not enough. But so she already feels inadequate. So how's she supposed to know what she wants, right? So it's really starting. And the tip for that is to figure out what you don't want first and then reverse engineer it. But really to look at, how did we get to where you are? What do you think about sex? What do you think about women who actually enjoy sex? Do you think a woman could have too much sex? And what we really judge women for being too much or having a high desire. We often compare the man, and I'm talking about heterosexual relationships because this tends to happen more there than same sex, but certainly same sex can have the same issues. But we take a man's desire and we consider it the default. She either has too low of a desire or too high of a desire, instead of figuring out, no, this is just two people in a relationship trying to navigate a relationship. There's no default. But so, what did your parents teach you? What did your religion teach you? What does Hollywood teach you? What does it mean to enjoy sex? And realize how we label those women, right? And so it's really understanding, like, we all, as much as I say we didn't get a sex education, we did. And it tends to be hurting us. So just journaling down, like, I think, do I prioritize sex? No. Why don't I prioritize sex? Because it's not enjoyable. Why is it not enjoyable? Because nobody ever prioritized my pleasure, including myself. Right? So it's really uncovering like where you are before we start being like, oh, go have great sex. You're like, I don't know how to do that. Right? Until we realize like, oh, I think sex is hard. I think it's dirty. I think it's a chore. It's on my to-do list. It's manipulation. I do it to keep somebody else happy or to keep them from being cranky, right? So we use it as a tool. So it's really understanding where sex fits into our life. Because I agree, sex isn't inherently good or bad. It can be a weapon, certainly, but it can be the most pleasurable. Some people say it is as close to experiencing God or transcendence or enlightenment or the absolute most present moment you can be in is orgasm, because the frontal lobe shuts off. You can't be thinking about the future and you can't be thinking about the past with an orgasm. It literally shuts off your frontal lobe. And so like there's so much beautifulness and goodness in the personal growth in trying to figure that stuff out.
So what I'm hearing is it's the stories we tell about sex that cause us the problems. And from the mindfulness perspective, we really look at noticing those stories. And if we don't notice them and we're not aware of them, we can't change them. And so that journaling is sort of uncovering and noticing what we were bringing, what stories we're telling, and even these like automatic thought patterns. If we think something is bad, or we might call them limiting beliefs or thought errors, and that those really are habitual thought errors. And so pausing, it sounds like to really look and be curious. And I guess I always throw out curiosity without judgment, because we might say, oh, I grew up in a family who has X, or when we bring judgment into it, that's actually not mindful, right? Mindfulness is non-judgment. The other interesting thing about mindfulness and sex is it's also non-striving. And it strikes me as a couple of like non-striving, we don't have a problem to solve, as you say, non-striving to fix your brokenness, but also many people engage in sex with the striving for orgasm.
Yeah. And,
taking that out of it also might make it more fun.
Yeah. Yeah. There's actually very new research on orgasmic coercion, which is fascinating, because we think like orgasm is a pretty good but not great marker for pleasure, right? But certainly sexual activity and sharing your body and your time with somebody else in and of itself can be inherently pleasurable, right? So orgasm's not the marker, but when you make it the marker for pleasure, or certainly if you coerce somebody, so there's a pattern of behavior where you're like, I need you to have an orgasm for me, right? It's almost like a feedback loop or an act or a performance. So I love awareness. It always comes, if I was ever to get a tattoo, it would say like awareness, because I'm like, it's just good to know, be aware, and it's just good to know, not judgment on anything else.
Well, and even the judgment, there's so much judgment around people not having orgasms, and that maybe you don't need that. Like, I think so many people, if they could liberate themselves from that thought, that like sex could, and I'm not saying anyone shouldn't have one, but it could be pretty good without it too. And maybe like detaching, where often, mindfulness also says non-attachment to the outcome, and just sort of enjoying whatever is.
Yes. I think a common thought, call it thought error issue that probably a lot of your people struggle with, because I struggled with it, is this feeling of not enough time, right? Well, I don't have time. I don't have time for a sex life. It comes up a lot. And my classic, like I've been coached for like years on my time scarcity stuff. So I come into this with a lot of understanding, but it was the early pandemic, March 2020, thoughts in my head, mom, surgeon, busy person. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. Repetitive thought. And there was nowhere to go. The world shut down. I wasn't going to work. You couldn't go to the park. Like, you literally couldn't go to the grocery store. Like, there was nothing to do for 5 days straight. I had my hand on the door of my daughter's bedroom, and I thought, I don't have enough time. And it was enough like of a cognitive dissonance of like, holy crap, I just told myself I didn't have enough time, and I literally can't even leave my house for 5 days. I have nothing but time. And it was enough to be like, what if it's just a thought? Yeah. What if it's not true? And that was one of my like big thought things that changed my life. But the point is, so people will be like, well, I don't have enough time for sex. And I'm like, that's just good to know, right? Like, you've created a life where making sure the dishes are done and your high stress job is more important to you than bodily pleasure, connecting, orgasm, if you want to call it that. No judgment, just good to know where you are. It's up to you to change that.
I love the flip that maybe you don't have enough time not to have sex also, because when we make the choice not to do it out of not having time, that has consequences. And so,
Yeah.
like, were you to choose it, and that made your relationship easier and made you feel better and was good for you, and you had all this pleasure, like, maybe you don't have enough time not to. That question often flips my mind when I'm stuck in some old thought loop. It's like, oh, so a lot of people say I don't have time to practice mindfulness. And I say, well, you don't have time not to practice mindfulness, because if you move through the world not mindful, you waste all this time and energy being miserable, and that takes more time.
Yeah.
And so it just struck me that that also could apply to sex for those of
I'm
us who
thinking
are
of
like,
it.
I'm too busy.
Yeah. So I was thinking, was it the Buddha who, or some teacher was like, what do you do if you don't have time to meditate for 10 minutes? And they're like, meditate for an hour. It's like, what do you do if you don't have time to have sex? Well, I have sex 7 times. But it
Yeah.
really just like, oh, but to look at it, like the average American is on social media and TV for 4 hours a day.
They have time.
They have time.
Yeah.
So when everybody's like, we don't have time, what do we do? And I'm like, yeah, you have time. You don't like me telling you that, but you're choosing to spend it in other ways. And what, at the end of the day, let's talk about real life for a second. Being on the couch, being on social media and eating Haagen-Dazs mint chip is a very easy, incredibly strong dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to do too much for it. And it's awesome. And you're like, well, I'd rather do that than have sex. And you hear women say that. I'd rather eat Haagen-Dazs mint chip than have sex. And you're like, yeah, well, good to know, right? No judgment, good to know. Ice cream's super cheap, easy dopamine. Like sex is a communication. It's a little bit of exercise. It could take 13 minutes, if you want. Like it actually is a little bit of effort. That's why people who prioritize exercise and are more fit actually have better sex lives. Number one, their body's kind of more used to like going from not exercising to exercising, which is a transition. And they also like if you look at the professional athletes, the fitness people, they're not like, I got here because of my spontaneous desire for fitness. Like, no. And if you look at the sex experts who are like, these people have great sex, not one, nowhere in the entire book, Peggy Kleinpatz wrote that book, nowhere in the entire book does it say, it's because I have spontaneous desire for this.
Yeah.
Like nobody says that. Setting an intention, prioritizing it, making space for it.
Yeah.
But realize dopamine, our brains just want feel good. And if you're having sex that doesn't feel good, or you're having sex that isn't rewarding, it's not setting up that dopamine feedback loop. Again, going just neuroscience, right? Mm-hmm. Ice cream, dopamine every single time.
Yeah. And so if you reminded yourself, even just in thinking of intentional thoughts about, sex makes me feel good, reminding yourself of that rather than, oh, maybe it doesn't, maybe it won't work out, maybe I don't have time, like setting some of those things just to sort of what you practice grows, I always say. And so really setting intentional thoughts, or even asking intentional, helpful questions. What do I like? What does feel good? When did it go well? Because I think we are always like, oh, it didn't go well last time, so I'm not going to do it this time. Or, this happened or that happened.
If you're like, how could I make this fun? Right?
Oh, I like that one.
Because the female, and gender stereotyping, but the female brain tends to, we like novelty. We like complex stuff. We get bored, right? Like let's do a food analogy. Some people can eat the same type of pizza every single night their entire life. They don't care. Some people are like, oh my God, if I have to look at that pizza from that place one more time, I can't do it. Right? It's like the sex that somebody in your house is enjoying might not be the sex that the other person in the house wants. And then we wonder why that one doesn't want the same damn pizza every single day. Right? Just no judgment, just good to know. Right? Yeah. But it's your responsibility to be like, hey, you know what? I love having dinner with you. I just can't do pizza from the same place every single time for the next 40 years. We're going to need to figure this out. Yeah. Can you help me?
I love that. I have another thought about connection and sex. I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Because in my experience, many women want connection first. And then if they have connection, kind of like they want desire first, then they'll want sex. And at least in heterosexual relationships, which is what I know, the men think that the sex is connection.
Men show love via sex a lot of times in a committed relationship. Certainly people have sex for not those reasons. But men aren't allowed to communicate. I mean, I'm stereotyping society, but it's how they feel close.
Mm-hmm.
Where that's, and again, I always apologize for stereotyping, but it's good to know because it makes people not feel broken or alone to be like, oh, you too. But the woman tends to want that closeness and connection first. Then let's have some sex. Right. And that's another journaling thing that most people don't ask their significant other, what does sex mean to you? What do you get out of sex? Why are you doing it? Well, it helps me sleep. It's relaxing. I feel close to you. It feels awesome, right?
Because I think having that conversation and remembering that, oh, this is how my partner shows love. Then all of a sudden you don't need to tell yourself a story that, well, I need them to show love first. And using your mind in that way and training your brain to see it, to get you to a place you want to be, could be helpful.
Yeah. And sex is different for all different people. We've all been socialized different. We've all had previous trauma, and really understanding and the communicating about the sex with your partner. That's where the intimacy is. It's not in 7 orgasms in a month, right? It's like, I feel really vulnerable if I lay a certain way, but it feels really good. Can we figure that out? Or I had no idea that you feel less connected to me when we don't have sex. That's really good for me to know. Let's prioritize this.
How do you help people? Because my sense is many people would feel uncomfortable bringing up that conversation.
Yep. I always say, blame me. Be dressed. Don't do it after a failed sexual adventure. Some people, spouses, you might have a spouse that really likes to know what's coming, springing stressful things that you've never talked about on them. So be like, I just read this book and listened to this podcast and I learned a lot about the female body. And I want to share that with you. Do you think we can go on a walk on Saturday? Walking's awesome for difficult stuff because you're movement and you're headed in the same direction and you're not looking at each other. And you can't go to the kitchen and go pee, right? So you're a little bit trapped. But walking is awesome. Just being physical because the body feels good. Realizing that these conversations are difficult. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be one conversation. But I tell people to start having these conversations early, when most stuff's going well for you, sets you up for oh, I've got menopause issues. We've got erectile dysfunction issues. I'm nursing a baby right now. I'm caretaking for my mom right now. I'm super stressed and working a ton at work right now. Those are all things that, you've got to navigate sex through. And if you are already pretty good at it, those aren't going to be so devastating. But I got to tell you how many people stop being intimate because the penis doesn't work anymore. Because for heterosexual couples, the penis going in the vagina is the definition of their sexual experience. And then they stop sitting next to each other on the couch. They stop holding hands. They stop cuddling. The intimacy's completely gone. And I always encourage, it's actually a chapter in my book of is the penis even important? Right? Because when we limit it to that, it's devastating when it's broken.
Yeah. The biggest sex organ is the brain. So my thought on the conversation also is back to, I love intention setting, but I coach a lot of people on difficult conversations, for example, at work, or when you have to go in and have a difficult conversation anywhere. And if you set an intention, perhaps the one that pops to mind here is to show up with love, or maybe to show up with kindness, but then you're showing up with that energy for what might be a difficult conversation. And so if your thought is, okay, well, I'm going to show up, what would love do around this conversation about sex, or around differences in desire, around differences in what we like, different flavors of ice cream, whatever it is, then that you bring that energy, and it's much more welcoming energy to have the conversation. Whereas if you come feeling just stressed out and afraid of being rejected or feeling super vulnerable, the vulnerability is going to be there, but you can show up with loving vulnerability. Perhaps that's where I would add the word love to it. And that might change your experience of it.
Yeah, I think, if you go in thinking your partner needs to change by the end of this conversation, that's your agenda, that tends to go poorly. Because they might not want to change, right? Or it might take a lot of conversations. If you come at it in a vulnerable, in a good way, I'm really nervous talking to you about this because I really feel like I might get rejected and I really worry that you're not going to understand. So let me just try to say what I say before you talk, interrupt me and let me say my thing. Setting it up to be I'm the vulnerable one here and I need your help in helping me feel safe. And you're kind of giving them a little job to do because you're can you help me feel safe in this? Instead of you don't give me orgasms, you need to change.
Yeah.
Then they're just going to feel like, wall attacked. I mean, there's guys who bring their wives into the office and they're like, she doesn't have desire, fix it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think she should sleep with you. This doesn't look like,
Yeah.
are you the person worth having sex with? Is always the good question.
And not that I want everyone to have a great sex life, but I also think when we approach it as a problem and we approach it as something to fix, and usually we want the other person to be fixed, but actually half the time we just think we're broken, we need to be fixed. And so it's all a big problem, that then the whole energy coming into it is not fun.
Yeah.
And it's sort of this like taboo conversation. And so maybe just deciding that, like, I mean, now I'm getting into my radical acceptance, which I often say is not the right way to go, but maybe here it's like, it's just where we are. I mentioned in the other podcast seasons, and like menopause is just a season of like sex, right? And so it's like, here we are, and this is what we've got today. And what do we want to do with it? How do we want to work with it? And realizing, like, I see so many people just tap into it. Another problem to fix. This is where I'm falling short and I'm not enough. And stepping out of that might actually create a little bit more space to find solutions.
100%. And there's no there. There's no like, once we have great sex, it's going to be just great sex. Right?
Yeah.
Once we have great sex, our relationship's going to be awesome. No. Like these are like life skills, and these techniques help with everything. I also say, like, I think working on your sex life is the final frontier in personal growth, because like the skills you employ to, like, what do I want? How do I ask for what I want? How do I become a good listener? How do I try and fail and not judge myself? Like, they're just skills that go into everywhere else. But yeah, the sex is so cool because there's no, and we love to compare, right? There's no there, because people will be like, just tell me how many times a week is normal. You're like, normal for what?
Yeah.
Right? And if once you start, and I'm like, I will not tell you what is normal, because that's one research study, first of all, with people that have their own biases. But number two, it just becomes like 8 hours of sleep and 30 minutes of cardiovascular exercise and 8 fruits and vegetables and 64 ounces of water, right? And as soon as you make sex a checklist, and so many women are having checklist sex, I just need to have sex with them before bed because that's what we're supposed to do, because I'm trying to control his emotions, right? We don't realize, like, I'm trying to make him not grumpy by having sex. Okay, well, now that's what sex is for you. Don't wonder why you're not desiring it. Right? There's a lot of, emotional adulthood, emotional childhood going into that. But yeah, once we make it a to-do list, a frontal lobe project, that's not where the orgasm lives.
So I want to pivot to a little bit of the fun mindfulness yoga component to sex, because I have this idea. So once you're having it, okay, strikes me that those are tools to, and I'll use the word make it better. And what I mean by better is better for you, like an experience that you enjoy. And so thinking just like when you go on a walk in nature and you employ mindfulness and you're noticing your 5 senses and you're noticing all the experiences, everything becomes that much more beautiful. And so mindfulness is similar in sex in that same way, where you can sink into your body and you can notice different things and you can actually pay attention to them rather than, thinking about all the other spinning thoughts. And so I have this, my belief is that if you practice mindfulness outside of sex and then you figure out how to bring it into the actual moments of sex, that you would actually be much more in your body and potentially much better able to relax and switch into your parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to aid the whole situation and make it more fun. Mm-hmm. And that yoga is a tool to do that. Yoga, if I'm just layering it all into the same conversation, it also helps you, it is, as you pointed out, people who exercise enjoy sex more. So yoga is the same kind of thing in that you're really practiced and used to using different parts of your body and paying attention to small muscles and noticing what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And so I see yoga practice as actually a way to tap into your body and to learn like what positions feel good in a not sex way, so that then you're like, oh, I can apply that same principle here. And so it's using your mind and your body together.
Yep. I mean, I think it's an amazing tool, and I use it, and it switches us into that parasympathetic, life better than that cortisol. So we're cortisol sympathetic all day long. To-do lists. I see 30 patients a day. I come home, I got dinner, I got kids, I read the books, put them to bed. Boom, 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 boom. we don't know, because again, we don't get sex ed, that we're not light switches. I can't just make the blood flow go to the pelvis and the clitoris turn on, right? You need to be calm. You need to be accepting. You need to be relaxing. You need to get rid of the monkey brain thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, right? And what really helps with that is switching into the parasympathetic and yoga. And so I've taken to doing yoga, just 20 minutes of yoga at night after the kids go to bed, not to try to improve my sex life, but like my husband's been paying attention, and I'll go do yoga, and he's like, I saw you did yoga. Are you thinking about, maybe you want, because it's literally like you're calm. You process your cortisol, right? Like you're literally in a different physical, psychological state. And we just think all brains and bodies work like an erection, a 20-year-old erection, let's be honest. Like, we're not light switches. We do have to transition. And the key for us is learning what that transition is, right? But if you're like, go, 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 boom, you're on the couch. The husband's like, you want to have sex? You're like, hell no, the Haagen-Dazs is the hit I need, right? Instead of like, I need 20 minutes to myself. Let me go breathe. Let me go take a bath. Let me go drink tea outside. Let me go journal. Let me go paint. Let me go blah, blah, blah. Realizing everybody's got a different thing that's going to transition them, but social media keeps our frontal lobe very active. I think it's difficult for social media phone to go immediately from that to sex. So pay attention to that if that's, one of the listeners of like, that's the brain like doom, 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 right? And now we have to quiet it so we can actually be like, oh, my pelvis feels really good, and breathe. And then you get into the cool stuff like breathing into your pelvis, breathing into your clitoris, breathing when you're having an orgasm to make it last longer, making the waves of it go bigger and less big. And again, there will be people who will be like, did you know you can have 18 different types of orgasm? And I'm like, can you please not tell my women that? Because they just made it a to-do list, checklist, achievement thing. And I don't want that. It's like, just appreciate your body. Do what makes you feel good. And again, like you said, like, how do you know you're having good sex? I think you have an absence of stress about it. Doesn't mean that absence of stress is going to be gone for your whole life. But you're not continuously like, do I have enough desire? Do I have enough wetness? Do I do it enough? I haven't figured out the fifth way to have an orgasm. Like, it's all this judgment. It's completely unnecessary.
So good sex, less stress, no judgment. And you said something which just made my heart sing, which is you talked about transitioning. And so I love talking in yoga and in coaching about transitioning well. And so it's really setting yourself up for success and having you end up in a space where you actually want to end up. So in yoga, for example, balance poses, like you have to actually get yourself there so you can balance and be in the moment. And actually a balance pose is a lot like sex, right? Because you got to like be in the zone and relax. And it's actually the more you push and the harder you try to make it all happen, you tip over. And so thinking about sex from this way of transition well, like transition from your day and maybe your dinner if it's a nighttime thing, or transition into it well, not make it just about the end product and sort of what you're going to get at the end, but the whole transitioning, setting yourself up for success with your thoughts and being mindful and your nervous system and getting your nervous system in a spot where sex is fun and easy and you're open. You said open, receptive, calm, all of those things. And realizing that that's all part of it. It's not just sort of this, as you said, checklist or a box. And so perhaps that's really where the mindfulness and the coaching is. You get rid of all the old thoughts that are not useful about what's wrong with you and what doesn't work, and get relaxed and be mindful and in the moment. And I'm going to, just because I'm a yoga teacher, practice, do yoga before sex. Like, what if that's what you do for you first, because you have this heightened awareness? Or in the mindfulness world, and we talk about practicing every day so you can drop right in much faster. And I also think that's true. So if you have some kind of practice where you practice mindfulness or yoga, and I imagine Tai Chi and some of these other things work similarly, that you can get yourself in that space so that you are just much more ready.
Yeah, that's right. And, studies that will, same with sex, right? Like if you, just talking about masturbation real quick, of like, if you know how to have an orgasm, you tend to be able to do it faster and quicker. It's like exercise and yoga, right? Like, just the more you know about your body and how it works, like it gets less clunky with practice.
Oh, I like that. And again, it's what you practice grows. That's a mindfulness tenet. But actually, physical things, what you practice grows. And so practicing getting yourself in a space where sex feels good, and practicing being in the moment in it and not distracted, and practicing those things that help you do that in the moment. Like all of these things are an intentional way to grow this.
And I think, it's what you're talking about is like, don't be in a hurry. Like if you rush it, orgasms do not like to be rushed. Like pressure is the biggest turnoff because your body's like, I'm not safe, right? I'm not safe. And you clearly don't want to just be in the moment and enjoy this because you're in a hurry, right? So it's like, don't be in a hurry. I say it in my book is like, we're used to like the 5-minute, legal consult and the 4-minute meal from Costco or whatever. Like we've been programmed that faster is better. You couple that with time scarcity issues where we've been told, how many times have we been told there's not enough time, right? We're told that all the time. So you couple those two things and it's like, no wonder why we're rushing through sex and we don't prioritize it. And the other thing I think for people to pay attention to is if you're putting sex right before bed as the only time you're having sex, right? I guess that might be something to talk to your partner about. Like they might really want it in the morning. You might love it after the kids go to bed. But what about like nap time or after lunch on a Saturday, right? And what are your thoughts about people that have sex in the middle of the day? Do we judge them, right? Like what are our thoughts about that? But if you couple sex right before bed and you're exhausted, you've given your all, and now it's nighttime, you actually will die if you don't have enough sleep. You will not die if you don't have enough sex. So what you're asking your body to do is to like delay the one thing that you need to survive to like recover from the day. And so you're like, oh, I just got to rush through sex so I can get to bed. It's like, don't put sex there then. Nobody said sex had to come right when you're exhausted on a weekday right before bed. Like think about maybe putting it somewhere else.
Such a good point about like being creative and being curious and figuring out what works for you. And we often talk about, having that conversation about my best time is in the morning, just my best time. Like I'm a morning person for everything. And yet, so it's kind of no wonder that they're mismatched there. If you're thinking
our energy levels, our energy levels might be higher midday or after a meal or, not when we've battled the forest fires all day long.
To it and fun, like just explore and like try to figure out what's fun, what works better. Where does it seem like it would be fun? And where does it seem like, oh, you're not supposed to do that? And where the judgment pops in, I think is really important. You also brought up this idea of hurry and urgency. And I actually just wrote a blog post this week about the urgency tax that came up in a coaching session with a client. And it applies to this too. I didn't write about this, but I'm like, wow, it's here too, which is there's a tax when you show up urgent, like urgent to finish and urgent to make it happen. And even if a partner shows up urgent, like there's a tax to that, meaning it's not as much fun. It doesn't work out as well. And like, it's just not the experience. It's not a mindful experience when you're urgent. And so
I like that.
There's an urgency tax to sex too.
Why are we in such a hurry? Like you can have sex your whole life until you die.
Yeah.
Like, what are we in a hurry for? And the thing of like, you can only continue to get better. Right. And I would say, just for my own personal experience, here I come fully formed on the other end of like life coaching and writing books. And like, here I am like born with amazing sex, but it's like only to share my personal journey of like, this probably took me a couple of years to get to this point. Right. And that doesn't coincide well with the Instagram of like, buy this supplement to improve your sex life and desire, or buy this one toy, or like those things are all fun and part of the journey if you want them to be. But it's like, this is literally figuring out how you want to prioritize your life, right? Do you want to practice yoga and mindfulness or do you not? Do you want to work towards having a great sex life in a relationship or do you not? But it's you gotta prioritize it. And there's no there, but you can get to a point where you're like, it's fun, it's light, you can be creative, you can talk to your spouse. No means no. That's huge for women. 9 states currently mandate sex consent in their sex education, which means 41 states don't. And when we got our sex education, if it was in the 90s or earlier, we didn't get any consent. Many, many women in committed long-term relationships don't feel like they can say no. That's worth unpacking.
Right? Well, and being mindful of whether you want to, because I'm not sure many people even pause and think, do I want to say no or do I want to say yes? In our generation, because there was no consent, that was not part of the process.
Right. It was sex for somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And all that uncovering, right? Good to know.
Yeah.
But when you get to the point where sex becomes more, like you and I are describing, it's like, no means no tonight, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean never again. It doesn't mean anything. It just means no, not tonight.
Yeah.
Powerful agency place to be.
And maybe there's not a hurry to fix it either. That was something you brought up a few minutes ago, which seems really important to me, that we, if we're not happy with it, we want to fix it. We want to make it better. But a lot of what we talked about today is that there's growth and fun and the whole experience in the fixing of it. And in the acquiring of the tools, the journey, we shouldn't be in a hurry or urgent to get through that to the other side either. And that it's like being in that mindfully is part of the journey and part of getting an end product that you want as well.
Yeah. And there's no there. And, with mindfulness, right, is and working with the ego and all these, things that you and I do of but once I'm mindfulness enough, then I won't be having to deal with my ego, right? Or whatever it is. Yeah. And you realize the gurus struggle. They just keep coming back to practicing over and over. The experts still utilize the tools. There's no there. This is your life and cultivating the life that you want to have. And people are in a hurry. I think it comes from a scarcity mindset, right? And it also comes from our culture of for $19.99, this too can be yours. No, the whole journey is the point.
Yeah. So being mindful of the journey. So we always like to end with reflection questions, and ones that I thought were relevant here are, how do you want to choose to think about sex? How could mindfulness change your experience of sex? And what's your timeline maybe for changing your sex life? How do you want to prioritize your sex life? And is there a helpful story that you want to tell about your current sex life and your own sexuality and your own body that might help enhance your sex life? So just some food for thought. There were so many good pearls of wisdom in there and things to explore. And so, Kelly, can you tell us how to find you and your podcast and your book so we can all learn more?
Yeah, You Are Not Broken is the podcast, available on all major platforms. KellyCaspersonMD.com for the website, KellyCaspersonMD for the Instagram. And the book is called You Are Not Broken, Stop Shooting All Over Your Sex Life. And that's on Amazon. You can get to it through my Instagram or my website as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Super fun. And I'm just going to put in a plug for all of you to join me for more yoga, because we've just had this whole conversation about how practicing yoga and practicing mindfulness will actually help your sex life too, which is not something I've said at the end of any of these podcasts before. And so join me. It's most Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific, and you can sign up on my website to get the link and join me, or you can join me on YouTube. There's classes there. So anytime you need a pre-bed yoga to practice uplevel your parasympathetic nervous system and set yourself up for success.
Awesome.
Thanks. Thank you all so much for listening, and leave us stars and reviews and share the podcast with anyone who you think might be interested. We'll see you next week. Welcome to today's mindful moment. A reflection on our feelings about this podcast. And I invite you here to just take a moment to notice how you feel after listening to the podcast today. Notice whether the topic of sex brought up discomfort for you, brought up judgment, brought up anxiety or stress, or whatever might be happening in your body. Maybe it was inspiring. Maybe it was exciting. Maybe it was interesting. Just taking a moment to sit with what is within you in this moment in time after hearing a discussion about sex, something that isn't a common topic of conversation for many of us. Maybe for some of you it is. And just noticing where you are and how you feel,
coming back into your body with compassion and kindness. And so I encourage you to pause whatever you're doing. If you're driving, please keep your eyes on the road and pay attention to that and just listen. If you're not, find a comfortable seat or notice your feet upon the earth and connect your sit bones down into whatever you may be sitting on, or notice all of your feet connecting with the earth. And tilt your pelvis forward and align your spine. Knowing that when we're aligned, it's much easier to be kind to ourselves, to not be distracted, and to tap into how we feel. And take in a huge inhale through your nose, and exhale through your mouth, letting it out. And bring a hand to heart and another hand to top, checking in. Noticing in your heart space, what is happening there? Is there kindness? Is there compassion? Is there judgment? Notice perhaps if you feel any tightness in your heart space or in your chest behind your sternum, or maybe a hollow spot behind your heart space, and take in a deep inhale, sending breath and compassion and love into that heart space, into any twangy discomfort that may have come up. Then exhale, blowing it out. In a moment to send yourself kindness and compassion for all of the stories and all of the sexual experiences that you may have had throughout your life. Allowing yourself a moment to send yourself compassion and kindness for however they went, however you showed up, whether you were smart about it, not smart about it, you think you handled them well or not well. They led to beautiful relationships, or they were outside beautiful relationships, or maybe there was trauma. And just allowing whatever is and whatever feelings come up there to be there. Breathing once again, connecting to the breath, sending the breath everywhere, your breath always available to you as a way to heal and nourish and support. And exhale, blowing out some of those judgments, the tension. Perhaps there's tension in your relationship because of sex, letting it go. Breathing in possibility and hope for the relationship you might be in, or one you wish to be in, or however long it has been since you've had sex, or not since you've had sex. Letting it out, all the judgment, all the societal expectations and frustration and energy and drama. Just letting sex be one of the things that we do, that we enjoy, but no pressure, no judgment, just a thing. One thing among many things that makes us human. Taking in a deep breath of acceptance and kindness and love and compassion for perhaps your thoughts and your experiences, and a partner's thoughts and experiences if you have a partner. And kindness for yourself if you wish you had a partner and you don't have a partner. Or kindness for yourself if you have a partner you wish you didn't have. All the options are perfectly fine and acceptable. Let the breath go, releasing tension. Noticing that the topic of sex often brings up tension in our bodies. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's fun and exciting. But if it does, compassion for that. Exhale, releasing and relaxing. Knowing that our bodies are human bodies. Sex is a human act. A human act that usually feels good, but not always. Usually works, but not always. And compassion for whatever judgments may be out there. Perhaps your parents had judgments, or you have been judged, or you've judged yourself, whatever it might be. And maybe you've stood up for yourself in the bedroom, and maybe you haven't. Kindness and compassion, sending yourself forgiveness, softness, and love. Breathing in through your nose once again, and out through your mouth. And then for a moment, might you be willing to change your thoughts about things a little bit? What possibilities around sex are out there for you? What could possibly make it more fun, interesting, exciting, less stressful, less tense? Maybe you want more sex. Maybe you want less sex. Just allowing your brain to wander and explore, dabble in the sunlight around this thought, bringing it out of the shadows into the light. Breathe in and out. If your eyes are open, perhaps close them. Sometimes the thoughts around subjects such as sex come better when the eyes are closed. Sinking into your body as the eyes close. And just notice your fingers, your toes, and anything else. Is anything hurting or calling out? Sending the breath there with kindness. Practicing sending the breath to any tight spots in your body, anything that aches, feels lonely, sad, unlovable, or very much lovable, whatever it might be. Just doing a little body survey, noticing what feels good and what doesn't, without judgment. So one more long cleansing breath. And exhaling any remaining drama and tension and judgment and whatever else might be there. Allowing yourself to soften into who you are, how you got here, and all the lifetime experiences, messages, drama, and trauma around sex. Letting them just be, taking away the power. And bring your hands to heart center, palms together, finger pads touch. Enjoy the sensation of finger to finger. Press your thumbs into the sternum, right into that heart space. And give yourself a moment to set an intention for how you wish to move forward, having heard what you heard today. And then experiencing this softness, letting go of judgment, letting go of an agenda, and just allowing yourself to be who you are in this moment. And deciding what you might want a little more of or a little less of with softness. No goals, just an intention. How would you like to show up for sex? Sex with a partner, the idea of sex, conversations about sex. Noticing even here that maybe that word evokes a reaction. Breathing into it. Letting the breath carry it away. And once again, focusing on your intention. More of, less of, possibilities. What might you like to try? When you're ready, lower your hands and open your eyes and let the light back in. Thank you all for joining me for practice today. Have a beautiful week. Namaste.